Begin the current Daf from Mesechtas Moed Katan Daf Gimel. Begin on the bottom of Daf Beis and Beis. Second line up on the bottom of the Yomid. We will continue explaining the halacha of our previous Mishnah, which discussed regarding various activities that are permitted on Chol Moed, and then we qualify these halachas in the Gemara. Ashur's corresponds to Bekaz and the Cheskel. Time is joining for today's Daf. Some of these discussed in today's Daf, like we mentioned, that our previous mission was discussing which malachas are permitted Chol Moed, like we discussed in the previous stuff, machnes adam peirosim na'ganovim, that you could gather your produce indoors because of thieves, and shoyle pishtanim in Amishra, which our Gemara continues with that halacha, removing soaking flags from the water. However, our Mishnah said kivim malach b'moed is also you're not allowed to schedule the work for Chol Moed. This we continue with leifin batim abadim of behemishal regarding purchasing houses, slaves, animals, or hire workers, and as it relates to skar pa'ula, that it's only if it's needed for Yom Tov, or if the seller, if the worker doesn't have what to eat. If you can move things from a house in one courtyard to another house, and whether that's in the same courtyard or another courtyard. To bring home utensils from the craftsman, whether you could protect figs by covering them with straw and how much. And if it's permissible to sell and work, it must be done privately. It's only permitted to sell produce, clothing, and utensils that are needed for Yom Tov, and all this has to be done privately. So begin the current Daf Yud Beis, Amid Beis, on the two lines up on the bottom of the Yamid. We said in the Mishnah, as we mentioned, that different things you're allowed to do Chol Moed. It said, B'shola Pishtanim in the Mishnah, B'chulu, you're allowed to remove the flags from the soaking flats, etc. But the Mishnah said all these things you're allowed to do, they're only if that's when they happen to happen. But if you were kivim malachti, if you scheduled it b'chol moed, then the Mishnah said yovedu, then it has to actually be lost. You don't have any benefit whatsoever. So this halacha that you're not allowed to have benefit if you scheduled this activity b'chol moed. So, but even the Yomei Yomei asked from Bezer the following question. It says this halacha of kivim malachti b'moed. Let's say someone did this. He scheduled to go ahead and remove his flax, let's say, from the soaking vat on chol moed, which there's a penalty. That's it. You can't benefit from it at all because of this problem of scheduling it. But the person passed away. What's halacha? Do we penalize his son who inherits it after him? Meaning, for the sons of Osher should be forbidden that malacha, because since it was kivim malachtim b'moed, halacha would be that it's forbidden to have benefit from it, just like it was forbidden for their father when their father was alive. That's the question that he asked him. Now, he's not the originator of such a question. This question was asked already in previous cases, but he's going to qualify and says, even in those other cases, if you're going to see that it is problematic, that would not prove to this case, as the Gemara explains. If you're going to say that we had such a case previously, someone cut off a little bit of the ear of a firstborn animal. Now, why would he do such a thing? Because he wants it to be a blemished animal, and then it's permitted for him. Because when it's unblemished, it has to be brought as a carbon. He wants it all for himself. Now, it's forbidden to do this because the pasuk says mum lo yiyaboy, but we read it not mum lo yiba, but mum lo yahayaboy. Don't inflict a blemish. Don't make it blemished. Now, if he did make a blemish, the rabbis penalize him. That's it. You cannot benefit from the firstborn animal. Now, in that case, the question was posed that if the person who did it dies, so kantu b'nei achra, there was such a tzad to say that we're going to penalize his son after him, that his son cannot have benefit either. Why? Says the Gemara, I can tell you that's because Mishum de Isur de Raisa. That's a biblical violation. It says Mum lo Yiba, which read Mum lo Yahayaboy. So I can understand why it's going to be that we're going to penalize even his son. But over here, this halacha of our mission of the laws of Chol Moed of Kivim Malachtim Moed, that's not an Isur de Raisa, because if you didn't schedule it for Chol Moed, it would be totally permitted. So how could it be totally permitted and forbidden to be scheduled? That's a rabbinic violation. That's a rabbinic halacha. So maybe even if we say by Tzar Moiz Mechoy that we penalize the son after, that wouldn't prove anything to our halacha. That's Deirais and this Rabban. Moreover, if you're going to say, because again this question was asked somewhere else, and even if you're going to say by Mocher Abdullah B'Kuchavnu, someone sells his slave to an idol worshiper, the rabbis penalized the owner and said that's it, he goes free. Which means to say that if let's say that slave runs away from the Oivik Kuchavim, the Yisrael cannot force him to go back to work. Now, even if you're going to say in that case that if umeis and then he dies, that comes to the achrav that we're going to penalize his son after him, and that the son also cannot force the slave to work for him. Yeah, I still wouldn't be able to prove my question from there. That's mishum dechol yema mafkele mitzvahs. That's because over there when you sum to the oibik chavim, every single day you're precluding him from being able to perform mitzvahs because when he's in the domain of the oibik chavim, he's not engaged in mitzvahs. But again, that wouldn't prove over here where you don't have that quality. Therefore, my question is, hachamai over here, what would you say? Do we say the gavra, the person that he scheduled his malacha to be done on Chalamayid, that's who Kaddish Rabban, that's who the rabbi is penalized that he should not have benefit from it, but less and he's not around, so there's no problem. In the Chefza, the Kaddish Rabban, no, the money is what the rabbi is penalized. And the assets are over here, and maybe they were even the sons, and that's what's that benefit. That was the question. But don't bring me a raya from Tsar Nois and Bechar, because that's the raya. So don't bring a raya from Mocha like Chacham, because that's your mafkiyah from mitzvahs. Over here, what would you say? Allah would be like Kim Malach and Moed. So he responded to him. He said, "Tinusua." It's a Mishnah Masechta Shvius that we could prove from. Mishnah says, "Sadish and Eskavtz b'Shvius." If you have a field that you remove the thorns from the field, Tizrol Matzah Shvius. You let to plant such a field after the Shemitah year. But if you work the field itself, the taiva, where if let's say you fertilized it, that you brought fertilizer with wagons and loads on the daira, which is through making a deer, a corral of animals, where you just have them all stay over there in that pen to fertilize it, that's working the land. That like then you can't even plant it on after the Shemitah year. Now, all these halachas are rabbinic, and even so, the rabbis penalized him that he shouldn't be able to plant it after the Shemitah. Okay, now one more piece. If I'm going to be so we have a tradition that a tiva of a mace, let's say he went and he fertilized the field and he died, the son could plant it after the Shemitah year. So you see the day comes when it's regarding a rabbinic violation, like the halacha of Mishnah keep malachta b'moed, and so to the halacha of the time and the day, it's only rabbinic, that the halacha is l'didei kantraban, they only penalize him. L'brei l'kantraban, the rabbi is not penalize his son. Okay, then our case in our Mishnah too. L'didei kantraban, we only penalized him. L'brei l'kantraban, we did not penalize his son, and therefore we answer the question that we see around rabbinic law, we're not going to penalize the son afterwards. Another proof from Abai is in like of tradition, if someone takes his friend's taharas, his things that are pure, and he makes it tameh, so we penalize the one who is metamet, that he has to pay him back. Now let's say umeis, let's say the person who did it died, we have a tradition, we don't penalize his son after. Now my time, what's the reason? Because hezik shein and nikir, when you damage something which is not recognizable, this piece of chalo, this wine looks the same as it always did, so then lo shmei hezik, that's not considered as damages because it's exactly as it always was. Now, but ultimately you're causing him a problem, a loss, by now that it's not Torah anymore. So the day comes upon him. For him, this rabbinic problem of Hezik, his biblically it's not, for him we penalize. For someone we didn't penalize, and therefore that would be the same thing about Chol HaShamayid, when you keep him malachta b'moed, when you're scheduling work to be done. You say, you call the electrician, you say, hey, I want you to do this work on the Chalamayid because I'm available. No, that's keep malachta, that would come to, but again, that's only comes him because it's rabbinic, and it's not kansu b'nei achra. The next Mishnah, continuing on what's permitted to be done in Chalamayid and whatnot. So in Leichin, you cannot purchase batim, homes, avodim, slaves, behemoth, and animals. Ela l'tzarech hamayid, only if you need it for the Yom Tov. Oy, or l'tzarech hamaycher, or if the seller needs, meaning shelam hayechel, he doesn't have what to eat. So he doesn't have what to eat. He never has to sell his wares. He's selling his house. So then you could buy it. Now, related to the halacha of the Mishnah, the Gemara says, "B'ayim ne'rav min Rav Nachman." Rav asked Rav Nachman, and we're going to make a raya from our Mishnah. He says, "Schar pu'ula." What's if someone has wages for a worker? Meaning the worker doesn't have what to eat. Ma, what's the halacha? Can you give him work to do to pay him wages so that he has what to eat? And is that permitted on Chol HaShamayid? Somebody says, "What do you mean, Tanina? We learned in our Mishnah. Our Mishnah said that you're not allowed to just purchase things unless if it's tzarech hamayid, or if it's for the seller needs to." Now, when the Mishnah then says the next word, she'ein loy ma yoichel, that he doesn't have what to eat, what's that coming to include? In other words, if it's coming to include the seller, you already said you're allowed to do l'tzarech hamaycher. So what are you adding on by saying she'ein loy ma yoichel? Oh, lav l'asuy yischar pula. Isn't it coming to actually include a third case? That when it says he doesn't have what to eat, it means the worker doesn't have what to eat, and then it would be permitted. So, because else those words would be unnecessary. Amalei says, no, it's not a raya from our Mishnah. Our Mishnah is just explaining When we say that you're allowed to do it because of the seller, what does that mean? For example, if the seller doesn't have what to eat, but you cannot prove that if, let's say, there's a laborer waiting on the street corner and Nebuch doesn't have food to eat, that you could hire him just so that you give him food, that doesn't necessarily mean the case. Someone who's selling, then you could buy from him. But to hire a worker just to give him wages so they could buy food to eat, that wouldn't necessarily tell us that you're allowed to do that. But the Gemara says, Abaya asks from a Mishnah later on, if it's ches of a base. The Mishnah says, Ein kaisvin shitri chay b'moed. You're not allowed to write documents of a debt on Chalash Moed. But if it doesn't trust, if the lender doesn't trust the borrower, so he wants to lend the money, but says, we have to write a document or else I'm not lending you the money, or he doesn't have what to eat, doesn't know who he is, so then he could go ahead and he could write the document of Chalash Moed. Says the Gemara, when it says he doesn't have what to eat, what is that coming to include? In other words, if it's the borrower that he doesn't have what to eat, what do you mean? But you already said that if you don't trust him, it's permitted to write the document. As Rashi points out, he cannot answer, like we said regarding the previous right of our Mishnah of Perusha Kumafarish, because how are you answering when you're saying that if you don't trust him, that that She'en Lo Ma'yochel is coming to explain that's not significant because it would be permitted even without that. Because it's just when you're lending, it says if you don't trust him. So Lav La'asui Yischar Pula, here it's evident, it's obvious that who is She'en Lo Ma'yochel. Obviously it means that the scribe, the sefer doesn't have what to eat. And then it's permitted on Chalash Moed to have him write the document, even if you trust the borrower, and even if you don't need it. But it's because the server doesn't have what to eat. We proved this question regarding if the worker doesn't have what to eat. That would be another heter to go ahead and do the malacha. So in the case of our Mishnah, when it says it could be talking about that the worker doesn't have. Not only it's not for tzarech hamayid, not only for the tzarech hamayid, it could even be for the worker. However, Ma'aser Rav Shesha asks from the Mishnah Mesechta Pesachim. Mishnah says as follows: this is the middle of a Mishnah. Chacham say, Shalosh umaniyos oisin malacha ba'arba pesachim ad chatzos. 3 professionals are allowed to do their work Erev Pesach up until noon. Who are these 3 professionals? Hachayatim, the tailors, Vasapanim, the barbers, Vakaisim, and the cleaners. Why these 3? Hachayatim, the tailors, Shekin Hed Yeteh for Gedarka b'Chalash Moed, because a regular person could sew in a regular way on Chalash Moed. So, although Erev Yom Tov has certain halachas of Erev Pesach, but it's not more severe than Chalash Moed. And just like Chalash Moed, technically, if you're a regular person, you're allowed to sew. So, okay, a tailor also could sew at least up until Chatzos. So to Hasapanim HaKreivsin, the barbers and the cleaners, the laundromats, they're allowed to do their work up until Chatzos and Erev Pesach, because we find a similar heter regarding Chalash Moed, because those who come from overseas by Yitzim Beis were let out of jail, they're allowed to get a haircut, they're allowed to do laundry on Chalash Moed. So you see that these 3 professions, we have kulais regarding Chalash Moed. So too, on Erev Yom Tov up until Chatzos, these workers, these professions could also work. That's what the Mishnah says in Mesechta Pesachim. It says, so on that, as Rav Sheish is, but if you can entertain to say that schar pul, like Abaya had asked to prove, that schar pul that if, let's say, you have a worker or laborer that doesn't have food to eat, you're allowed to hire him and pay him simply to give him food to eat for Yom Tov. So then kol malach is nami nishturu. So then all activities should be made on Erev Pesach up until Chatzos. Why? Because technically every malacha is permitted on Chalash Moed if it's a laborer that doesn't have food to eat, that you could hire him and have him do that work. Obviously, you could resolve and show that no, schar pula shein l'mayachal is actually asar Chalash Moed, and that's why you can't do all these other labors up until Chatzos and Erev Pesach. To which Maskeva Rav Papa. Rav Papa asks on the question of Rav Sheshes. Rav Sheshes was asking for the Mishnah Pesachim that spoke about 3 professions that you could do a malacha Erev Pesach up until Chatzos. Obviously, he holds that any malacha that you're allowed to do on Chalash Moed, which the wording of that Mishnah does sound like it, but obviously that Rav Sheshes held any malacha you can do on Chalash Moed, you can do on Erev Pesach. So on that premise, Rav Papa asks on Rav Sheshes, so wait a second. If that's the case, binyan l'street. You like to build buildings on Erev Pesach. Because I could tell you technically also shekein kois lagoyler shazrabim, because you have a halacha that we brought previously on Daf Zion. If you have a wall that's leaning over into Rosh Hashanah, So he said, you could demolish the wall and build it in the normal way of Chol Moed. Why? And that's kind of because of danger. So technically building also is done on Chol Moed in a certain oifen. So then based on your line of reasoning, you should be allowed to build on Erev Pesach too. And similarly, Maskim the Ravina also holds like our Papa in that he asks on Rav Sheshes a similar type of a question. He says, wait a second. If that's the case, that everything mutar on Chol Moed, you want to say mutar on Pesach, lavler lishtuni. Then you should be permitted to write as a scribe, calligraphy, write whatever you want to. You're allowed to write a document, as the Gemara is going to tell us later on Daf Yomi, for a woman getting engaged, or a divorce document, or receipt. So don't tell me everything that you're allowed to do in a similar vein on Erev Pesach, because then everything's permitted. Ela Omar Rashi, rather Rashi says, to answer the question Rav Shesha was asking, that it's not difficult. That yes, it's like Abayad said, that schar pa'ula she'elam ha'yochel, if you have a worker doesn't have food to eat, you let him go ahead and hire him a chodesh hamayim. What are you going to say? Then why isn't it permitted on Erev Pesach, all these other professions? No, he says, because Moed Arba Asar Karamas, are you really asking a contradiction from the halachas of chodesh hamayim regarding that of the 14th of Nisan of Erev Pesach, Rav Sheshes? No, they're different. Although, yes, the Mishnah there is comparing them, but not the same exact. Moed Mishum Tirchu. We said many times in this Masechta that the problem about working on Chol Moed is because of effort. We want you to be calm, with Yeshiva Das, on Chol Moed. We're welcome to say the shiur, but when the situation of loss, the rabbis permit you to go ahead and do the tircha. So too, let's say a poil she'elam ha'yochel, if the worker doesn't have what to eat, it's a situation of loss, so the rabbis permit it. But Abba Asa Mishum Tzarech Yom Tov, to do malacha on Erev Yom Tov of Pesach, that's only things which are necessary for Yom Tov. Something that's a necessity for Yom Tov, Rabbi is permitted, which are those three professions. So, yes, we're comparing it to Chol Moed, that it has to be, that there is an element of kula regarding it, but not every kula. Only a kula that will give me some Yom Tov need, like all those things that people are going to in every Yom Tov. We're going to the cleaners, going to the barber, going to all these different things, to the tailors. Those are things that, and same thing, yes, like Rashi explained, if you have Ein Lema Yochel, you're right, Erev Pesach you would be able to. Of course, if a guy doesn't have money for Pesach to buy his matzahs, you could hire him Erev Pesach, because that would be considered Tzarech Yom Tov. But Midlav Tzarech Yom Tov, but you're asking regarding all malachas, if it's not necessary for Yom Tov, Lo Yishur Rabbanan, of course the rabbis are not permitted, and there is not a difficulty on the baya that he's showing that, yes, you're allowed to give on Chol Moed for the workers, She'elam ha'yochel, because, and that wouldn't tell me, so every malacha should have been on Erev Yom Tov. It's not true. On Erev Yom Tov is only for Tzarech Yom Tov, whereas Chol Moed is for Erev Tircha, but when there's a Pseida, the rabbi is permitted, so it's not exactly the same thing. Now look at the next Mishnah, continuing regarding again what malachas you're allowed to do on Chol Moed. So the Mishnah tells us, Im mefanen mibayis labayis. You cannot move from one house to another house stuff that are in another courtyard. Now, interestingly, the Yerushalmi actually says it's permitted to move from a different house to your own house, because I like the words of the Yerushalmi that says being sha'adiv la'adam. It's very sweet for a person l'adav b'shalai. Wants to live in his own house. God, I can't stay by the shveh. I can't be in the some temporary rental. I want to be in your own house. I want to be home. K'nikshan. So the Yerushalmi says it brings that. To move from, that's Simchas Yom Tov. To move from someone else's house to go to your own house, that's permitted. But the Mishnah says you're not allowed to move from one house to another house. But you could move it to your courtyard, which Rashi says at this point, initially in the Gemara, it sounds like that you could bring from a house in a different courtyard to your courtyard. Now, the Mishnah continues and says, when you're not allowed to bring back utensils, garments from the professional that you had brought it to, you're not allowed to bring it back home on Chol Moed. But let's say you're concerned for them, maybe they're going to get stolen, then you could at least move it to a different courtyard. But you can't bring it home. Now, the Gemara asks, you told me in the Mishnah that you could bring stuff, you could move stuff to your courtyard. Says the Gemara, she said in the opening of the words in the Mishnah, we said you cannot move from one house to another house, which that sounds like klal. That sounds like you can't move at all. So how the next word saying you can move it to your courtyard? So Mabai says the Seif is talking about to a house in your courtyard. In other words, the Mishnah is saying you can move stuff from a house in your courtyard to your courtyard. So therefore, that's not as extreme as the opening halacha, which was from another courtyard, and therefore it doesn't contradict from another one. Is too much of a tircha, and your own courtyard is not such a tircha, and therefore that would be permitted. Next halacha the Mishnah was, you're not allowed to go to the craftsman that you had brought your stuff. You brought over your machine, your laundry, or whatever, the washing machine, and you can't go pick it up on Chalash and Light. Now, Amar Papa says, Badig Lon Rava. Rava was testing us to see if we would know how to answer regarding the following contradiction. It's not on the one that we learned in our Mishnah. It says, Imavin Kilim Beis Omen. You can't go bring back your car or whatever it is that you had by the mechanic. You can't bring it back from the Beis Omen, your vessel. However, he says, do we have a contradiction? We have a Mishnah Masechet Pesachim that says, Melichin Umavin, you're allowed to bring back home, Kelim and Beis Omen, your utensils from the professional, even though it's not a tzarech hamayit, even though you don't even need it for Yom Tov. So that seems to be a stira. So Shaninla, we answered him, he says, no, they're talking about different cases. Kan over here, the Mishnah Masechet Pesachim is Barba Aser, is on the 14th of Nisan on Erev Pesach. Yeah, there, as we had actually said this previously on this Amid, we said that there's no Isra of Tircha on Erev Yom Tov. So therefore, you're allowed to bring back vessels from the professional. But Kan in our Mishnah's B'chilish Moed is on Chalash Moed, then you can't bring it back because that's a tircha. It's unnecessary tircha to go pick up your car or go whatever it is. That would be forbidden. That's one answer we gave. Another approach you could say is no. Actually, both Mishnahs do Machal Moed. How to resolve it? Kan in our Mishnah is b'maminai. When you trust that mechanic, that professional, then you can't bring it back again because it's unnecessary. But Kan b'shein mamin. The Mishnah Pesachim is when you don't trust him. If you don't trust him, then you can bring it back. So therefore, it's not a contradiction. Actually, as a continued in Bates, Batanya. Usually Batanya is a question, but here it's actually supports this. We find this idea in the Brisa. As the Brisa says, Mavin Kalim and Beis Umar. You're allowed to bring your vessels from the craftsman back home. Going, for example, kad, a jug, mibesa kada, from the potter. Or a kais or a cup, mibesa zagug, from the one that makes glass. Because jugs and cups, these are all considered l'tzarech hamayit. These are things that you need. Avol loi, but you cannot bring back home tzemer mibesa tzeva, your wool from the place where it's being dyed. Because wool you're not using, that's something you're going to make a garment out of, but it's not a tzarech hamayit. And like neither can you bring back vessels from the craftsman, which tzemer and kalim are not tzarech hamayit. Now, ve'im ein loy, but if let's say the professional doesn't have ma'yichot, doesn't have what to eat, so then it's okay, you could pay him a chalash hamayit, but a menicha, you have to leave it by him. Now, if you don't trust him, then okay, you leave it next door. Maybe his concerns can be stolen from there. Okay, then you put it to some other courtyard. Now, if you don't trust it even in another courtyard, then you bring it discreetly back home. But one thing we see is that when you don't trust him, then you could bring it back home. So that was the second resolution that we had. We said that both could be Tomah Chodesh and Moed. So how do we resolve the contradiction? Can you bring it back home or not? Oh, that depends. If you trust him, then you can't. If you don't trust him, as this Bryce itself is making the differentiation, then you can bring it back home. Problem with the second answer, says the Gemara, is Teratz to Mavin. You only resolve one of the two variables. You resolve the contradiction regarding are you allowed to bring back home stuff from the professional or not. But Melichin Kasha. But you have a difficulty regarding bringing it to the professional. Because the Ktani, we learned in the Mishnah Masechet Pesachim that you're allowed to go ahead and bring it. And our Mishnah says, Ein Mavin. That you can't even bring it back. For sure you cannot bring it to the professional. And as Rashi points out, you can't answer, when you don't trust him, then you could bring it, because what does that mean? How could you bring it because you don't trust him? It's only when it's by him that we can understand. When you don't trust him, you not bring it back. But that wouldn't answer about bringing it there. So the Gemara says, you're right. Ella, it's clear, it's clear that we have to answer like we originally said. You can't give this answer of they're both chalamayit, because that would only answer bring it back. But how could you resolve that the Mishnah says something that you actually bring it there? If you don't trust him, how could you bring it there? If you don't trust him, I understand you can get your money out of there, you get your stuff out, but not to bring it there. So you have to say like the first answer we gave, that over there Pesachim is talking about the 14th of Nisan, the Erev Pesach. That's permitted because no problem about tircha. It just has to be tzarchei Yom Tov. Over here in our Mishnah, which we said tircha is forbidden, and therefore you're not allowed to bring stuff back. That's the resolution of that contradiction between those two Mishnahs. Now look at the next Mishnah, again continuing on regarding what are you allowed to do on Chodesh Moed. Mishnah says mechapen, you could cover esakatzias, the cut figs, bekash with straw. He says, af ma'aben, you could even make it thick. Now, the Mishnah continues, Moichim Peiris, those who sell produce, ksus, and garments, vekalim, and vessels, so Moichim B'tzin Lo Tzarech Hamoed, they could sell it, but discreetly, if it's needed for Yom Tov. Moreover, Hatzayadin, the hunters, Vadashishis, and those who thresh and crush the wheat into grits, Vagaroisis, and those who crush the beans into split beans, Oisin B'tzina, they have to do it discreetly, because maybe people are going to say, oh, the one who's buying it is buying it, not necessarily he's going to Costco, he's going to whatever, some big store, and he's buying, unnecessarily, he's not buying for the Yom Tov, and they have to do it discreetly if it's L'tzarech Hamoed, and for Yom Tov purpose. He says, however, they were stringent on themselves, which he doesn't explain what that means. The Gemara is going to explain that. But firstly, regarding the opening halacha, the machlekes of our Mishnah, we had two opinions regarding what can you do with the cut figs. Do you do machapen with kash, or do you do even ma'abed? So pligibar the priya bar abed bar we have machlekes amaram, we were tavai mashmei de chizki, both are in the name of chizki v'yechanan, regarding what do these terminologies mean in the halacha of the Mishnah. Chadama one says that the Tana Kama that says mechapen, that you cover, means a klushi. It means to say that you cover it very thin, with branches that are distant one from the other, so it's not even a full covering. That not such a major tircha, that you're allowed to do. Ma'avim, Rebbe says you could even make it thick, mint asmuchi, that you could even make the branches near each other, which is a total covering. That's one interpretation. Chadam, the other one says, no, machapen, when we said you could cover, it's bein ha-klushi, bein asmuchi. It means whether it's thin or thick. Ma'avim, when you said you can make it thick, is more than that. It's isa kamin kriz. You could make it even like a huge pile. You could cover it all at once, so that it's easy to cover it. That's what Rabbi Yehuda was saying, more lenient, which Tanya Amahoch is similar in the Bryce, like this last interpretation. When you read this ma'avin, you can make it thick. It means isa kamin kriz. The Rabbi Yehuda, you can make like a huge pile. That's the most lenient interpretation of what ma'avin is. Now we said in the Mishnah that moichri peiris ksus v'kem, those who sell clothing and produce and vessels, they have to do it. They have to sell it discreetly if it's L'tzarech Hamoed. Now, b'chulu etc. Where B'yisi says, he said his words were Heinech Mir Al-Atzman. They were stringent on themselves. So we go with the following question: when B'yisi says Heinech Mir Al-Atzman, they were stringent on themselves. What does that mean? There's two ways we can interpret what he's saying. Is it to have an abdi klal, meaning more than the Tana Kama? The Tana Kama says, okay, really, you have to do it discreetly, and if it's L'tzarech Hamoed. And then B'yisi is saying, you know what? In practice, people did more stringent than that. They actually wouldn't do any work at all. They wouldn't sell it at all. Maybe, no. When he says that they were stringent on themselves, he talking about what the Tana Kama say. To have an avdi b'tzina. This that the Tana Kama says that they would do it discreetly, that you should do it like this. Visi disagrees. He says, no, that's what they did on their own intention. But if they want to do it in public, they could do it because Rabbi Yisi actually holds more lenient. That you don't have to. He says, this that they did what the Tana Kama says, that's a stringency. But really they could even do more lenient. So which one is it? Is he saying to be more machmer that people did? Or is he saying, no, what the Tana Kama says they did, that's just a stringency, but really could do more leniently. So Gemara says, Tashmat's being a raya, clearly from the following Brisa. The Brisa says, someone sells produce, garments, and vessels. This is what we said the Tana Kama says. You could sell it discreetly if it's needed for Yom Tov. Here he says it explicitly. He says, Tagori Tveria, the merchants of Tveria, they were stringent on themselves, they wouldn't sell it all. So, although maybe the primary halach is like the Tana Kama, he says in practice, people would not even sell at all to be machbar. So the tzadichais v'leifes v'dagim, those who would hunt and trap wild animals, birds, and fish. So the Tana Kama says, you could trap it discreetly if you needed for the purposes of the Yom Tov. He says in practice that Tzadei Akei, the hunters of Akei, they were stringent on themselves, that they shouldn't trap at all. So to Deshaishe, those who would thresh the grain of Chilka, Trogis, V'tisni, which we can shortly explain what those three types are, but those who would thresh the grain would be Deshin B'tim L'tzarech Hamoed. Tana Kama says they can thresh it discreetly if it's needed for the Yom Tov. The Yisiyam, he says, however, the Deshaishe Tzipayri, the one who would thresh the grain in Tzipayri, they were stringent on themselves, Deshin Kalika, that they wouldn't thresh at all. Again, they were more machmer than the primary halacha. Now, parenthetically explaining, Amar Abaye says, Chilka, what are these Chilka Trogis B'tisni that we said those who thresh the grain? So Chilka means like the word of chelik. A chad l'tarti means when you split the grain into two. Trogis, like from the word of try, which is three, is chad l'tlas, when you split into three. And tisni is chadul arba, is when you split it into 4 parts. However, when Rav Dimi came along, he actually disagreed with what is chilka. He says chilka is kunta. It's actually spelt, which the Gemara later on is going to explain that they would make it moist. Now, but that's what chilka is, as we're going to explain, because they made it moist. So that's how they hold it. So it actually is chilka is not from the word of chelik. It's actually of chalak, of smooth. But that we'll explain shortly. But Rav Dimi says it means spelt. Now, Meisvei, however, the Gemara asks from the Mishnah Mesech Machshir that says chilka, tragis, v'tisni, these 3 types, tamein b'chal makom. They're tummy everywhere, meaning they're makabel tumah, they're susceptible and vulnerable to tumah. What do you mean everywhere? Meaning whether a village or whether the large cities. Why would we think a village or a city is different? So the reason is because in Pesachim Daf Mem and Aleph, the Gemara tells us over there that the fine flour of the cities are makabel tumah because they were already in contact and became susceptible and come in contact with water. In contrast, in the villages, they're not so particular about fine flour to soak it in water. So their flour actually is tar because it was never actually processed with water. But chilka, that's what the Mishnah is telling us Machshirin, that's tummy everywhere, even in villages, because it's not possible to make chilka without moistening it. So therefore it's going to be makabel tumah because it's already susceptible, because it already was soaked in water. That's what the Mishnah says. On that as the Gemara, Rabbi Shloimy Schwartzberg, according to one who interpreted that what does it mean chilka and this traga and targis and tisni? It means chadul l'tarti, litlas, larba. It means you take that kernel of wheat and you split it into either in 2, or in thirds, or in quarters. I could understand why it's tummy everywhere, because this kasha, because the way you do it is by making it moist, so it became susceptible to tumah. El mandam akunta, according to one that says that chilka is spelled, why is spelled tummy everywhere, let's say in the village, kasher, it did not become susceptible to tumah, that wasn't in contact with water. Why is it any different than their flour? So when you have spelled flour, it's no different. It says Gemara no kugun mekalfan. We're talking about where it was whole. The shell was taken off from the spelt. Oh, they love the sholu b'mayim. If you didn't soak it in water, it wouldn't peel. So therefore, that's what we're saying. You spelt everywhere, even in the villages, is makabel tumah because it's only possible if it had come in contact with water. Now, then we just clarify v'maikor lechilka. According to that interpretation, that chilka means spelt. If it says like the interpretation of grits that you split into 2, so of course it's chilka because it's like from chalak, from chelik, like a part that you split in half. According to the one that says it means spelled, why is it called chilka? Oh, because like we just explained, because the shakel, since you took off the shell, it was whole. So what you did is chilkeu. So when you take off the peel, you made it chalak, you made it smooth, because you hold it. That's why it's actually called chilka, and that's actually why it's makabel tumah everywhere. Because the only way you could do it is by coming in contact with water. The Gemara continues to ask Mesif in the following brisa. The brisa says, if someone takes a vow forbidding himself from grain, Asr af, he's also forbidden other things that are like grain type, the pul hamitzu yavish, the dried Egyptian bean. Some certain things you could make, like we have the cassava, everyone's making the pretzels out of these flour. Certain things you can make flour out of. So it's like grain, let's say the dried Egyptian bean, but it's permitted if the Egyptian bean is moist and it's not like a grain. And is permitted in rice, and also is permitted bechilka b'trogis v'tisni. Those 3 things. Now, says Gemara Bishlam, I understand according to one that says that what are these things? They're chadlo tarti, chadlo tlas, chadlo bar. It's when you take the kernel of grain and split into 2, or into 3, or into 4 parts. Shapa, that makes sense. Why you would actually be permitted to eat them, even though you took a vow of forbidding yourself from dagan. Because the nafkul matter is dagan. Because actually they're excluded from the category of dagan. The reason for that is because once they're split, they don't pile up well. Dagan is from like reshus dagan, when you make it into a pile. When you split it, when you actually have whole kernels, so they can pile up. When you split them into pieces, they don't pile up well. So that wouldn't be categorized as dagan. But according to one that says that chilka is spelled, what do you mean dagan ma'alyu? That's one of the 5 types of grain. Why would spelt, which is chilka, be permitted for someone who took a vow from dagan? Because the Gemara kasha, that most definitely is a question. Now the Gemara says, Rav Huna, shadalahu lahanu kudfuyasa. Rav Huna, going back to the halacha of what are you allowed to do on cholish Moed, what even if it's a tzarech Moed, that you have to do it discreetly. Rav Huna actually permitted those who would sell the spices. He permitted them lamezel lezvuna to go and sell kirchai in their normal way b'shuka in the street, out in the open to be selling their wares. Says the Gemara, Rav Kahana asked that from the following brisa. The Brisa says if the chanus is psuchul l'stav, if your store is open up to a styav, which a styav is where there's like benches on all four sides, and sometimes people go and sit over there, and the store opens up over there, but it's a discrete area. It's far away from these Rishus Harabim. It's like this pedestrian mall, and it's with these benches all around. So then Pesach V'Nel Kedaka, then you could open up and close it in the normal way, because it's not open up into the public domain like other stores, not on Fifth Avenue. So therefore it's not such a public desecration, it's not a zilzal of Chol Moed, then you could open up. But Psuchul Rishus Rabim, it's wide open, you're on the main street, and open up to Rishus Rabim, then you can't just open up your store in the regular way. Pesach Achas V'Nel Achas, then you could open up one door, but you have to keep the other door closed, can't do it the normal way, can't sell in the regular way. Now, but Erev Yom Tov Achan Shachag, but on the last day of Chol Moed, on Erev of the last days of Yom Tov, then Maitzi, then you could bring out a Ma'ata Shuka Ir B'Peris, and you could adorn the marketplace of the city with the produce. That's because B'Shul Kabed Yom Tov Achan. That's because of the honor of the last days of Yom Tov. Okay, it sounds like Nekabed Yom Tov Achan, only because of the honor of the last days of Yom Tov. But if it's not for the honor of Yom Tov, you can't just bring out all the produce and sell it out on the street. How did he let them sell the spices out there in the market, in the street, if you're not allowed to do that on Chalash Hamayim? It's more like it's not difficult. The Bryce is told by produce, then you have to be concerned that people might be buying it for any day of the year, and that would be considered a zilzal for Moed. You're not allowed to sell it out on the street. Rav Huna that permitted was with spices. Spices you could sell in the normal way, which Rashi says, discusses this, but like leek and cabbage, where everyone knows it's for Yom Tov, and there's no suspicion because these things don't last a long time. So everyone knows he's buying it for the last days of Yom Tov or for Chol Moed, and therefore even B'Fahes, even out in the open, it would be permitted because there's no chashad and conscious other things you can't just sell out in the street because it looks like maybe you're buying it for after Yom Tov, and therefore that resolves why Rav Huna was allowed to have them sell out in the open in the street. Shall return to the second parak. Says Moed Katan, parak Mishahafach, which spoke about turning over the olives, and again, which continued the theme of the first parak of the halachas of Chol Moed. What are you allowed to do, like in situations of davar ovid, but still that you're not allowed to do a tircha. You say you can't do something that's too much of a tircha, like going through the whole process. But if it's a major davar ovid, then maybe you would be allowed. Thank you to any time.